How could you even think of serving this garbage to another person? This is completely inedible. It's certainly not something anyone would ever pay for. The moment my son's wife slammed the pot of stew onto the floor, the rich, savory aroma of the broth billowed up in a cloud of steam, filling every corner of the room. It was a scent that should have signaled warmth and comfort, a scent of home. But no one took any pleasure in it. Instead, a hateful silence, thick and suffocating, descended upon us, punctuated only by the cruel smirk on her face. A cold contempt wrapped itself around the room. I simply stood there, frozen, my hands limp at my sides. I said nothing. Because in that instant, I knew. This was the moment I had been waiting for. This was the moment it had finally come. This kitchen was once my dream. The living room was more than spacious enough for me to live out my later years, in peace, and the magnificent island counter, my son had told me, was chosen specifically for me and my love of cooking. "Mom, I knew you'd love this," he had said, his smile so full of warmth and promise. "You can cook your heart out in here every single day." I can still see the look on his face, that expression of genuine affection, burned into my memory like a photograph. But that smile, that sun, had long since faded, vanishing into the hazy mist of a distant past. The man standing before me now was a stranger, his eyes cold and hard as he looked down on me. And next to him stood his young wife, her voice a shrill instrument of her anger. In her eyes, I could see it clearly. My very presence in her home was a stain, a piece of filth to be scrubbed away. "I don't think this arrangement is working out anymore," she said, and with that one sentence, everything was over. My favorite stockpot, my well-seasoned cast-iron skillet, my collection of wooden spoons worn smooth by years of use, and I myself. We were all cast out, tossed onto the curb like so much unwanted trash. I found myself standing on the front porch in nothing but my house slippers. The night air was sharp and biting, a cruel wind that whipped against my cheeks, heralding the arrival of winter. A light rain began to fall, at first just a few scattered drops. Splat, splat. The droplets that landed on my shoulders were colder than any tears, but I did not cry. Perhaps I no longer had any emotion left within me worth crying over. I was once the executive chef of Fleur de Lis, one of the most exclusive and celebrated restaurants in the world. I earned 3 Michelin stars on 3 separate occasions and made a name for myself in the hallowed world of French haute cuisine. I never spoke of this to my son or to anyone else in my new life. I never mentioned it at all. Why? Because the life I chose as a mother had no need for such glory, no room for fame or accolades. To simply cook delicious food and watch the people I loved enjoy it. That was all the reward I ever needed. That was more than enough. But in the end, even that small, simple joy was not permitted. Dragging a small rolling suitcase behind me, I made my way toward the train station in the dark. I hadn't told anyone where I was going. There was no one left to tell. As I walked, a single memory surfaced from the depths of my mind. It was something a famous food critic had once told me, long ago in Paris, France. "Your soup," he had said, his eyes closed in reverence. "It's like you found a way to bottle a mother's love." Back then, I was undoubtedly a chef. But now? What was I? No longer a mother, no longer a mother-in-law, and certainly no longer a chef. Divested of all my titles, all my roles, what was I supposed to do now? I boarded a late-night train heading into the city. My destination was a place no one knew about, an old apartment whose door I had quietly closed years ago. It was the home my husband and I had shared, a place filled with memories. I couldn't have known it then, but that was where I would begin everything anew. And yet, I know for certain that on that cold, rainy night, something inside of me, something long dormant, had quietly but definitively awakened. It was the moment I realized that cooking could also be a weapon. My name is Evelyn Reed. I am now 72 years old, and I live a quiet life, accompanied only by the memories of my late husband. But in my former life, I was the head chef of a restaurant in Paris, France, called Fleur de Lis. In 1986, 1989, and again in 1992, 3 times we were awarded the culinary world's highest honor, 3 Michelin stars. It was a proud and glorious time. Back then, every day was a battle, but it was also a source of brilliant light. The searing heat of the kitchen, the precise control of the flame, the intoxicating aroma of a simmering sauce, the final, perfect drop of coulis placed upon a plate. I poured my very soul into every detail. I dedicated my life to delighting the palates of discerning gourmands who traveled from every corner of the globe to taste my creations. But not a single person in my family now knows anything about it. When my husband, Arthur, passed away, a thought occurred to me. Perhaps it's time to hang up my knives. To build a real home, a real family, I left the kitchen behind. I chose to spend the remainder of my days not as a chef, but as a mother. When my son, Michael, told me he was getting married and starting a family of his own, my heart swelled with a new kind of warmth. Finally, I thought, I might have a chance to fulfill my role as a mother. And so, without a moment's hesitation, I moved in with them. The first few months were a delightful novelty. I would wake up early to make a proper breakfast, pan-searing salmon until the skin was perfectly crisp and golden. I took care to make my grandson's school lunches both colorful and nutritious, arranging the items in his lunchbox just so. But then, pot roast again? Mom, your cooking is a little dated, you know. Wow, you make your own chicken stock from bones? Who has time for that anymore? It's so 50s housewife. Before I knew it, comments like these became a part of our daily routine. Michael never said a word. He would eat his dinner in silence, then leave for work in silence. One evening, my grandson Liam took one bite of the meatloaf I made and wrinkled his nose. "Mommy's is better," he announced with the thoughtless honesty of a child. I felt a chill spread through my chest, as if a window had been thrown open in the dead of winter. I managed to smile and began clearing the dishes. Yes, well, I suppose everyone's tastes have changed these days. Still, I kept on cooking. I continued to wake at 5 every morning, to chop seasonal vegetables from the farmer's market, to carefully simmer my stocks and sauces using the old, time-honored methods. I did it because I believed, with all my heart, that this was how I could show my love for my family. But then came the day. My son's wife, Jessica, looked at the dinner I had prepared and recoiled slightly. "Does this smell funny to you? Mom, are you even checking the dates on things in the refrigerator?" Her accusation hung in the air, and Liam quickly chimed in. "Grandma's smell is a little yucky." I put down my fork. Quietly, I stood up from the table, walked back into the kitchen, and simply stared at the pot on the stove. In my 3-star kitchen, everyone followed my orders without question. A single plate of my food could bring a smile to 100 faces. And yet, now, in this house, I was seen as nothing more than the old woman, the nagging mother-in-law, the useless grandma. That night, back in my room, I retrieved something from the very back of a dresser drawer. It was a newspaper clipping, folded and yellowed with age. It was a feature from the December 1992 issue of the French magazine, Le Chef. There I was, smiling out from the cover. I was so young, so proud, so beautiful, and more than anyone else in the world. I was a woman in love with her craft. What would that woman think of the person I had become? "Arthur, my love." Was I wrong? I whispered to the framed photograph of my late husband on my nightstand. I had always believed that dedicating oneself to family was a virtue. But perhaps my cooking, perhaps my love, was no longer wanted by anyone. Had I been reduced to nothing more than the household cook? No tears came. Instead, I felt a tiny flame flicker to life deep within my soul. It was quiet, but it burned with a steady heat, the last glowing ember of the passion that had once defined me. "No," I murmured to my reflection in the dark window pane. "It's not over yet." And so, the next morning, I decided against making the simple, hearty beef and barley soup I had planned. Instead, I pureed pristine white cauliflower in the blender, infusing the cream with a hint of cumin and lemongrass, a sophisticated velouté, a taste of my Paris kitchen. No one would even touch it. What is this? It tastes weird. Mommy, did Grandma make this? That day, the entire pot of soup was poured, untouched, down the kitchen sink. And in that moment, something inside of me quietly snapped. I understand, I said, my voice calm. I untied my apron, folded it neatly, and returned to my room. Yes, it was more than enough. I would not stay in this house. It was time to return back to the world of cooking. Back to the world that knew who I was. I remember that day with perfect, painful clarity. It was late afternoon, and I was in the kitchen, preparing dinner as I always did. The familiar sounds of chopping and sautéing, the comforting aroma of garlic and herbs slowly filling the house. I had once believed these were the symbols of a happy home. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something that didn't belong. It was Jessica, my son's wife, pulling a small box from a high shelf in the pantry. She took out a sheet of glossy adhesive labels. One by one, with the focused air of someone performing a ritual, she began peeling them off and sticking them onto the lids of plastic takeout containers. Le Chateau Gourmet. Premium meal, delivery. The words were like a thorn in my side. I looked closer and read the fine print beneath the name. Royal de Paris. It was the name of some nameless, fictional restaurant, presumably in France. My curiosity got the better of me. Timidly, I asked, What is all this?" Jessica just shrugged, not even bothering to look up from her task. "Oh, it's nothing. A friend of a friend set me up. I've started a little high-end meal delivery business. You know, a lot of people these days aren't satisfied with regular home cooking. They want something with a brand." I pressed on. "And the food safety, who is responsible for that?" Just then, Michael walked in, his voice cutting through the air like a cold blade. "Mom, that kind of thinking is so outdated. We're running a modern business here. It's probably not something you would understand." His words made my chest tighten, but I kept a placid smile on my face. "Oh, is that so? How wonderful for you. And where are you sourcing your ingredients?" They exchanged a quick, knowing glance. Jessica answered curtly, "We use commercial-grade frozen products, so it's all perfectly fine. Besides, the delivery service handles most of the logistics. There's no point in getting into the weeds with you, Mom." That night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about it. To wrap a meal in a cloak of falsehood and call it branding. To take everything I held sacred, the integrity of ingredients, the precision of technique, the importance of hygiene, the very heart of cooking, and use it as a gimmick, a decorative prop for a business. But I said nothing at the time. I didn't want to destroy the family. I didn't want to make waves. I simply held that quiet discomfort inside me, and from that day forward, I began to watch, to truly observe how they lived their lives. One afternoon, the whirring of the printer next to the refrigerator caught my attention. I peeked over and saw a stack of freshly printed menus. Poulet à la sauce truffe. Soupe de la mer à la provençale. The page was filled with elegant French names for sophisticated dishes, but in the kitchen, all I saw was plain chicken breast being boiled in a pot of water and a large can of commercial cream sauce being warmed on the stove. There wasn't the faintest scent of truffles in the air. And yet, this dish was to be named chicken in truffle sauce and sold for a small fortune. I gently picked up one of the menus and stared at it for a long time. Words, I believed, were meant to honor food, to describe it with truth and reverence. But what was happening here, right before my eyes, was nothing short of deception. This is not the cooking I have known, I thought to myself. I placed the menu back on the stack, just as I had found it, and slipped away before anyone could see me. If I had spoken up, I knew I would have been dismissed again with a wave of the hand, called interfering or old-fashioned. My mind drifted back to my days in Paris. Back then, every word spoken in my kitchen was filled with pride and conviction. Cooking was our way of communicating life, of sharing our heart. It never, ever relied on pretense or exaggeration. And now, this. I left the kitchen in silence and returned to my room. The soft light of the setting sun was streaming through the window, but for some reason, its warmth felt a million miles away. Another day, I gathered my courage and decided to speak up. "Does this particular sauce contain any nuts?" I asked as gently as I could. Some people have severe allergies, so it would be wise to list all the ingredients. Before I could even finish my sentence, Michael cut me off, his tone icy. "That's not how the world works anymore, Mom. Image sells more than substance. Image sells more than substance." At that moment, a sharp pain shot through my chest. It felt as if my entire life, my entire philosophy had been negated in a single breath. I said nothing in return, I just quietly swallowed his words. But in my heart, a thought arose, clear as day. If this had been 30 years ago, I wouldn't have even allowed a person with such a mindset to step foot inside my kitchen. Because I believe with every fiber of my being that cooking must stand on a foundation of two things: honesty and responsibility. Even if it's your own family. The deep, unbridgeable chasm between the woman I was and the reality I now faced was laid bare. All I could do was let out a small, quiet sigh, and even the sound of that sigh reached no one. That evening, as I stood alone in the kitchen long after everyone else was asleep, I found myself asking a question. What am I doing here? Every morning I rise before anyone else to start the prep work. At midday, I offer advice on their recipes. At night, I stay up late to finish all the cleaning. I have done all this without asking for anything in return, believing I was doing it for the family. But Michael's words echoed in the silence of the room, again and again. Image sells more than substance. Perhaps that was the moment it started. A tiny hairline fracture appeared in the foundation of my heart. Maybe it was the first time I allowed myself to see the reality I had been so determined to ignore. I am not protecting my family. I am simply a tool for their business. WT. The thought surfaced, cold and unwelcome. Are my hands nothing more than a convenient instrument for them? And has my silence been interpreted as convenient agreement? Thinking back, I could hardly recall a single instance since moving into this house when I had heard the words, "Thank you." But the person who had come to accept that as normal, as expected, was none other than myself. I, who believed I was helping, had somehow grown accustomed to being used. As I realized this, the hand holding my chef's knife began to tremble, just slightly. It wasn't from the cold. It was the deep-seated feeling of wrongness, a discomfort I had long suppressed, finally taking physical form. I awoke while the city was still asleep, slipping out of my room into the quiet darkness of the house. The clock on the wall read a few minutes past 5. After splashing my face with cold water, I tied on my apron and silently let myself out the front door. The day was his birthday, Michael's. I could still see his face as a little boy, that beaming smile as he asked for a third helping of my soup. The memory made my steps quicken. I headed for the old farmer's market, the one with stalls run by families who had worked the land for generations. It had a warmth the big box supermarkets could never replicate, a place where vegetables still smelled of the earth they came from. First, I chose a large, heavy turnip, its skin smooth and white. I held it in my palm, feeling its reassuring heft, noting the tightly packed leaves at its crown. This one, I knew, would lend the perfect subtle sweetness to my broth. Next, I selected a few sweet onions and some crisp green celery. Finally, I splurged on some beautiful bone-in chicken thighs, even though they were a little expensive. Just for today, I whispered to myself, clutching my cloth shopping bag. I want to make something with real flavor. When I returned home, I retrieved a small bundle from the back of a kitchen drawer. It was a fine mesh cheesecloth, one I had used in my restaurant in Paris to strain my consommes until they were clear as crystal. A small handkerchief my husband, Arthur, had given me long ago. On the white linen, embroidered in delicate blue thread, were the words, "Pour le bonheur de la famille," for the happiness of the family. Gazing at those words, I took a deep, steadying breath and slowly turned on the burner beneath the heavy stockpot. This wasn't just another meal. It was the flavor of my life, a prayer for my family poured into a pot. It was a rainy November evening, and I was lovingly preparing to serve dinner. It was my signature dish, pot au feu, a recipe once praised by the French newspaper Le Monde as a dish to warm the soul. "Happy birthday, Michael," I whispered to myself as the stew simmered perfectly. I was just about to carry it to the dining table. It was in that moment, as I lifted the heavy pot carefully with both hands, that she spoke. Jessica suddenly pinched her nose, her face contorted in disgust. "Ugh, what is that smell? Did you use tap water or something? We don't live in the middle of nowhere, you know." Her words struck me, and for a moment it felt as though time itself had stopped. But that wasn't the end of it. She turned to whisper to a woman. One of their friends, I presumed, who was sitting in the living room. "Hey, get this," she hissed, loud enough for me to hear. "Doesn't this whole setup look like something out of the 70s? The pot, the smell. It's all so hopelessly outdated, it's actually funny." I heard the faint sound of their snickering. I was still holding the heavy pot, frozen in place, unable to say a word. This pot au feu was my pride. It was the very dish that had been celebrated in the papers in Paris. It was a dish I had made countless times for my family, a vessel of precious memories. But now, in my own home, it was being mocked as outdated and provincial, a punchline for a joke told in front of a guest. I lowered my head, trying to breathe in the familiar, comforting aroma one more time. But before the scent could fill my lungs, a sharp pain shot through my chest. Was this why I was here? To be a source of amusement? For the food I made with love to become an object of ridicule? Could anything be more humiliating? Just as I managed to set the steaming pot of pot au feu on the dining table, the voice I had come to dread echoed from across the room. "It stinks. What did you do to the water? You should have just used bottled," Jessica announced loudly. Her words felt like a physical blow, tearing through my chest, but I remained silent, simply lowering my gaze to the pot. The flavor, I knew, was perfect. The aroma was a deep, complex harmony of vegetables and chicken, a scent that should have felt like a warm embrace. But then, "Mom, what are you trying to do, serving this junk?" Michael's voice was low and menacing. "Are you trying to sell this slop to our customers? You have to be kidding me." He didn't just speak. He rose from his chair, grabbed the handle of the pot with one hand, and slammed it violently onto the kitchen floor. "Your food is an embarrassment to us. Get out! Get out of this house right now. There's no place for you here anymore." With those words, my world shattered. It was the pot au feu I had made hundreds of times in Paris, a dish I could create with absolute confidence. I had spent the entire morning preparing it, pouring all my love for my son into that single pot. But the moment it was rejected, he stood up and did the unthinkable. "Just stop it, Mom. Serving this stuff is humiliating," he yelled, and then he kicked the side of the pot with his foot. The heavy pot tilted, and the simmering stew spilled over the edge, cascading from the table onto the floor and splashing across my feet. For a heartbeat, the room went completely silent. I could hear a few hushed gasps and nervous murmurs from their friends. He shattered the silence, his voice even louder than before. "Seriously, Mom, just stop. You're ruining my image. What are people going to think? That I'm some pathetic guy who can't even keep his own mother in line?" I couldn't find a single word in reply. I just stared at the wet floor, watching the last wisps of steam fade into nothing. There, in the puddle at my feet, were the turnips and carrots I had so carefully chosen at the market just that morning. Something inside me quietly shattered. This house, this family, this kitchen in that moment, I understood with absolute clarity that it was no longer my home. I didn't grab an umbrella. I just took my purse and walked out the front door. My lips didn't tremble. No tears fell. There was only the rain pouring down. I gripped the handle of my soaked suitcase and quietly pulled the front door closed behind me. The rain was still coming down hard, and the cold night air bit at my skin. Without an umbrella, I took one step, then another, down the porch stairs. When I reached the front gate, I felt a sudden urge to turn back. I wanted to burn the image of that house into my memory one last time. The place, where I had stood in the kitchen for years, praying for my family's happiness. But beyond the window, the light in the kitchen was already out. The space I had warmed with my hands, with the steam from my cooking, was now shrouded in a cold, deep darkness. At that moment, a single thought rose from the depths of my heart. My fire will never again be lit in that house. It wasn't just about the light. It was about the warmth I had nurtured, the memories infused in my food. The flame I had called family, all of it had been extinguished behind that closed door. Without bothering to wipe the raindrops from my face, I quietly turned my back and began to walk. The puddles at my feet vaguely reflected the shape of the house I had loved, but even that reflection blurred and vanished with each new drop of rain. The walk to the station was through a downpour so heavy an umbrella would have been useless. Soaked to the bone, I just kept putting one foot in front of the other. That house had once been my pride, a testament to my love for my family. Cooking there had been a sacred act, my life itself. But that night, it had all been reduced to nothing. I will never forget the feeling of my wet coat clinging to my skin, a cold, heavy weight on my chest. Is this really how it ends? A voice deep inside me asked. But as I asked, I saw something ahead of me, a faint but unwavering light. No, I answered myself. What else? It cannot end like this. The cooking was my soul. It was a light that no storm could ever extinguish. What came next was a return to an old apartment, a decision to rebuild my life on my own terms, and a conversation with my past. That night, my hair still damp from the rain. I stood before the door of my old apartment building. I wiped my hair with a small towel as I looked up at the familiar facade. The lock hadn't been changed. The door creaked open, and I was enveloped by the nostalgic scent of old wood and the profound quiet that only the passage of time can leave behind. I walked to the kitchen, and there, hanging on its hook just as I'd left it, was that old towel. It was a simple white dishcloth, but embroidered on it in gold thread was the logo of Fleur de Lis, the restaurant Arthur had given me when we opened our first place in Paris. On the back, I knew, were words he had stitched himself. Pour le bonheur de la famille, for the happiness of the family. I still remembered. My hands moved on their own, reaching for an old wooden box in the back of a cupboard. I gently opened the lid and took out the notebook inside. The deep, coffee-brown leather cover was worn at the corners, etched with the small nicks and scratches of time. But inside, miraculously, the pages were all perfectly preserved. Old olive oil stains and splatters of sauce told a story of their own, a testament to the weight of years. In the margins, written in my own hand, was a mix of French and English. And next to my notes, in faded pencil, were my husband's small comments. I turned to a particular page, and there, I saw the words he used to say so often: true flavor begins with honesty. Honest ingredients, an honest heat, and above all, an honest heart. In that instant, a quiet warmth kindled in my chest. Cooking was not just about following a recipe. It was the crystallization of a person's life, of all the love and feeling they had accumulated over time. 30 years ago, a French publisher had taken an interest in that very recipe book. They had offered me the equivalent of approximately US $63,000 for the publishing rights. I turned them down. My reason was simple. I believed food was meant to be savored, not sold. But now, a different kind of fire was beginning to burn within me. I sat down on a kitchen chair and took a deep breath. Then, with a trembling hand, I picked up my smartphone and dialed a number. Ring, ring, ring. OCE, allo? Allo? The familiar French voice on the other end made my heart ache. Michelle, it's me, Evelyn Reed. After a few seconds of silence, his voice burst with excitement. Evelyn? You're alive. I have never, ever forgotten your cooking. Thank you, I said, my voice small. I'm sorry to call so suddenly. But I need you to listen. I took a breath, gathering my thoughts. I want to cook again, Michelle. Just one more time. I want to create the flavors I was always meant to share. But this time, not for anyone else. For myself. On the other end of the line, I could feel Michelle nodding in silent understanding. I understand completely. Your food is exactly what the world needs right now. I couldn't help but clutch the phone to my chest and close my eyes. The heat of that old kitchen, the aroma of simmering stock, the sound of butter sizzling in a pan, all came rushing back, so familiar, so alive within me. I could stand up again, not to be used by others, but by my own will. I will. I will cook to find myself again, I whispered, and clutching the recipe book to my chest, I left the apartment. The night air was sharp and cold, but my heart was burning with a steady, certain flame. My name is Evelyn Reed. I am 72 years old. I was once the head chef of Fleur de Lis, a 3-star Michelin restaurant in Paris, France. That night, when my hands touched my old notebook and the handle of my oven, I felt a small fire ignite within me. I was sure of it. 1 week later, I quietly opened a small eatery. To start Evelyn's Table, I didn't borrow a single cent. The majority of the funds came from that offer I had turned down in France those years ago. More than a decade ago, when I was still commanding a kitchen in Paris, a publisher had approached me. Would you be interested in putting your recipes and philosophy into a book? He had asked. At the time, I politely declined, telling him, the time isn't right. But then, living here in the States, after hearing those words, this food is garbage, something inside me finally awoke. I will not let my story end like this. And so, I contacted the publishing house again. On the condition that my name be kept anonymous, I agreed to the publication. The advance they gave me was just about US $63,000. I used every penny to renovate a small, old house I had found for rent. Furthermore, aside from my pension, I had occasionally taken on small culinary instruction jobs at local daycare centers and senior facilities. The pay was modest, only a few $100s here and there, but since I lived a simple life, the savings had slowly but surely accumulated. It was more than enough to cover the kitchen repairs and the initial cost of ingredients. And more importantly than any of that, I had my tools. My knives, my cutting boards, my copper pots and pans, my linen cloths. Every single one was like a comrade in arms, a fellow soldier from my battles in a Michelin-starred kitchen. All I had left were the tools polished by time and the memories etched into my soul. But that was enough. When I decided to open the restaurant, many people asked me the same question. Can you really do this all by yourself? To be honest, I wasn't without my fears. But my answer to that question has never changed. Yes, I can. I have spent my entire life in a kitchen. When I was a young woman in Paris, France, I was entrusted with a 3-star Michelin kitchen. On a sold-out winter evening, I would command a team of 12 chefs, sending out dishes with split-second timing. The intensity of the fire, the movement of the ingredients, the flow of the dining room. It was all mapped out in my mind. That sense has never left me. The eyes and instincts from those days are still alive in my hands. After returning to the United States, and after my husband passed away, I took a job making lunch at a nearby daycare center. It was far from glamorous, but the children's simple words, "This is yummy," saved me more times than I can count. Through that experience, I learned deeply about American tastes, especially the gentle flavors that are nurtured within a family. And I believe the most important lesson of all is to never be flustered. Evelyn's Table started to generate buzz. Photos appeared on social media, and requests for television interviews began to arrive. But I never changed my hours, never expanded my menu, and never even revealed my full name. Why? Because what matters to me is the flavor, not the kafami. I don't cook to make a name for myself. I cook to create a dish that can quietly comfort someone's heart. That conviction is what sustains me now. I rented a tiny, 300-square-foot house tucked away on an unnamed side street. I didn't even put up a proper sign, just a single wooden plaque with the words, Evelyn's Table, carved into it. The night before opening, I was alone in the restaurant, quietly making my final preparations. I purposely left the lighting as it was, with its old, dim, incandescent bulbs. The tables and chairs were nothing special, just pieces I had found in storage and polished myself. But the space was filled with the warm, nostalgic scent of old wood. The task that took the most time was preparing the tableware. A soup bowl from my Paris kitchen with a small chip on the rim. A saucer with a faint olive oil stain on the bottom. And a teacup where the faded fleur-de-lis logo was still barely visible. I polished each piece carefully with a soft cloth. Every time my fingertips traced over a scratch or a dent, memories came flooding back like waves. This plate? This was from that night I made a mistake and burned the sauce. I whispered to no one in particular, a small smile on my face. My failures, my successes, my pride, all of it was steeped into these dishes. I felt that more deeply than ever. Finally, I taped a small piece of paper to the wall next to the restaurant's door. On it, I had written, "Welcome. 3 hours to savor with the soul." As I finished putting up that single sentence, one that might never be read by anyone, I felt tears welling up in my eyes. This restaurant was not for anyone else's approval. It was simply my wish, my prayer, that my cooking might, once again, reach someone's heart. I would be open for just 3 hours in the evening. There were only 10 seats, no reservations, first come, first served. The menu would be a simple set meal that changed daily, and on some nights, I would offer a reinterpretation of a classic dish from Fleur de Lis, adapted with American ingredients. That day, as I quietly hung the small, open sign on the door, I took a deep breath in my heart. And so, it begins. For only 3 hours, for only 10 people that night. When my first customer slid open the small wooden door and stepped inside, I felt a faint tremor deep in my chest. "Welcome. Please, have a seat wherever you like." The air in the small room was filled with the savory aroma of chicken and the sweet, gentle fragrance of slowly simmered parsnips. The first dish I brought out was my own take on a classic pot au feu, a sort of American farmhouse version of the French stew. I had slow-cooked thick slices of white turnip, sweet carrots, and beautifully browned bone-in chicken thighs in a delicate broth made from thyme, bay leaf, and a secret blend of herbs. It was a dish that held two worlds within it: the memories of my life in France and the taste of the American seasons. It was the answer I had found for myself, expressed in a single bowl. This was the very same dish that someone had once called old-fashioned and hick. But even so, I had always believed in its flavor. The reason was simple. This one dish contained everything I had learned, everything I had felt, during my time as a mother. As I gently carried the steaming bowl to the table, I simply watched in silence. The moment the customer took their first spoonful, their hand paused mid-air, and I saw something glisten in their eyes. After a moment, they spoke. "See you?" For some reason, this reminds me of my mother. The voice was so quiet, it sounded almost as if they were speaking to themselves. I bowed my head deeply, whispering a thank you in my heart. Thank you. That one sentence is the greatest reward I could ever ask for. In that instant, I knew I was right. A flavor that touches the human heart can exist without a name, without a sign out front. It is a kind of cooking that sits gently beside someone's memories, and that was exactly the kind of dish I had always wanted to create. I was the only one in the kitchen. From the preparation to the final plating, I poured my heart silently into every single step. For the first 3 days, only a few curious passersby wandered in. "This tastes so nostalgic," one woman said. Another murmured, "This stew, it's just like my mother's," as quiet tears streamed down her face. On the fourth day, a photo posted on social media began to spread like wildfire, and by the fifth day, there was a long line stretching down the block. People started calling the place the little shop on the side street that brings you to tears. By the 10th day, a crew from a local news station came to film a segment. Standing in front of the camera, the reporter asked for my name, but I simply smiled and said, "I don't think a name is necessary. What's important is that the dish in front of you reaches your heart." Still, the host pressed me. When he wouldn't let it go, I added just a few more words. "A long time ago, there was someone who called my cooking garbage." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. But if that person still has a conscience, wherever they are now, I want them to taste it one more time. To taste the real flavors that is so different from what they knew back then. That night, after returning to my kitchen, I found myself staring at an empty plate, asking a question to the silence. I wonder where they are now, what they're eating. Do they remember, even a little, the taste of the food I used to make for them? But I told myself that finding out was not my purpose. I didn't stand up again for someone else's sake. I picked up my knives once, more to reclaim my own pride. For a moment, I thought I saw my late husband's smile in the steam rising from the pots. True flavor begins with honesty. The words he had written in his old notebook are what guide me now. And so, tomorrow, I will once again pour all my heart into simmering just 10 bowls of stew. Even if my name never becomes known, if that flavor can remain in someone's heart, that is more than enough for me. The air on that afternoon felt heavier, more humid than usual. The steam rising from the pot of stew behind the counter seemed to sway in a strangely silent dance. I was repeating the same days, seemingly unchanged, but somewhere in my heart, I may have had a premonition, a feeling that something was about to shift. That day, after finishing the lunch service, I was about to step out the back door when the phone in my pocket began to vibrate. The screen displayed a familiar number. I was sure I had deleted it, yet for some reason, the number made my fingertips hesitate. I listened to the ringing for a few seconds, taking a slow, deep breath. "Hello, this is Evelyn." A thin, trembling voice came from the other end of the line. The same voice that had once been so full of confidence. "Mom, I'm sorry," I remained silent, simply receiving his words. "On the internet, I saw your restaurant, that pot au feu, it's that one, From. The day you served that, all of our customers, they stopped coming back." His voice grew unsteady, and I could almost feel him weeping through the phone. "We failed the health department inspection. Something was wrong with our supplier, and the investors, all of them." He choked on his words, unable to continue. I quietly lifted the lid from the pot on the stove and inhaled the aroma of the soup I'd left simmering on a low flame. "Mom, that flavor, that soup, I was wrong." At that, I finally spoke. "No, it wasn't the soup that was special." My voice was quiet, but clear. "What you lost was not flavor. It was your heart." I could tell he was speechless on the other end. "Cooking," I continued, "is not about serving. It is about offering." After saying that, I let out a long breath and continued, my voice gentle but firm. "The day you went so far as to call my food filth, I truly fell apart. But the reason I was able to stand up again was because someone tasted my dish with their heart. Mom, I want to start over from scratch. Hey, will you teach me?" Hearing those words, I closed my eyes. An image of the pot au feu, left cold and uneaten at his restaurant, floated in my mind. But the words that came from my lips were, "I don't think you yet understand what it means to offer." Cool. For a moment, there was silence on the other end. I could feel his regret and helplessness seeping through that quiet. "Even if you copy my recipe, your heart won't reach anyone. First, for just one person, try to make a single dish with everything you have." I said those words and then gently ended the call. After hanging up, I went back into the kitchen and gazed into the pot. I adjusted the heat just slightly and tasted the broth with a spoon. The flavor was unchanged, but my heart was wavering, just a little. To forgive is not an easy thing. But I can watch over him. I whispered this to myself in the quiet of the kitchen and slowly turned out the lights. Whose heart would the next dish reach? With that thought, I began my preparations for tomorrow, all alone. The day I received that call from my son, I must admit, my heart was in turmoil. "Mom, I'm sorry. I was wrong about everything. That soup, it made the customers go back to you." His voice was shaking, so choked with emotion that it seemed to take all his strength just to admit he was wrong. I listened in silence for a while, and then I answered quietly. "It wasn't the soup. Those people, they came to eat something that was made with heart. I could hear him sobbing through the receiver, and strangely, I felt the hard stone that had been lodged in my chest begin to slowly dissolve. For so long, the food I made had been called stale, old-fashioned, even garbage. I felt as if I had lost my place, even within my own family. But now, at last, I could feel that my flavor had moved someone's heart. I wouldn't say I have forgiven him, but it's true that my heart feels a little lighter. However, I have no intention of going back. Not to that house, not to that kitchen, not to a place where the warmth of my hands cannot reach. From now on, I want to warm my own life with my own two hands. I feel it, quietly but with certainty, that my final kitchen is right here. No longer to gain someone's approval, but simply so that someone's day can end gently. I will make another pot of soup today. On the morning of the grand opening, I headed to the shop a little earlier than usual. It was located on a small side street in a quiet neighborhood. The building, a converted old house, was a space I have slowly renovated with my own hands, finally breathing new life into it as a small restaurant. Behind the counter, I had hung the old soup pot I brought back from Paris, along with that ladle. "Good morning," I said, as if to myself, as I opened the front door to let in the fresh air. I was telling myself that today marked the beginning of a new chapter of my life in the kitchen. The restaurant was by reservation only, limited to 3 parties a day. It was a place to provide a space for people to savor a meal with their heart, for just 3 hours. That was the way I decided my restaurant would be. Around 11 o'clock, as the time for the first reservation approached, a very small customer appeared at the door. It was a little girl, perhaps in the 3rd or 4th grade, with a backpack on her shoulders. She seemed a little nervous about opening the door, but she stepped inside with a determined stride. "Excuse me, I have a reservation. Is it okay if I say the name?" she asked. I was a little surprised, but I nodded with a smile. "Yes, of course." She took a small piece of paper out of her bag and showed me the name written on it. It was indeed on my reservation list. But more than that, I felt a faint sense of familiarity with the name. After I showed her to her seat, she spoke, still looking a bit tense. "My mom told me to come here," she said. "A long time ago, this lady taught me how to cut an onion. The trick to doing it without crying. And also," she said, "she taught me not just about cooking but about how to be a person." The moment I heard those words, I was speechless for a while. Onions. The lesson I had taught her in the kitchen back then, I never imagined. It had remained in her memory in such a way. "Heh, is that so?" I finally managed. "Do you remember the trick for cutting them without crying?" When I asked, the little girl nodded happily. "My mom still cuts them that way. She doesn't cry, but she laughs a lot." I couldn't help but laugh out loud. Laughter suits cooking much better than tears, after all. That day, I prepared a special creamy chicken and vegetable stew for the little girl. It was a variation on that first soup, the one that made me want to start cooking again. I couldn't help but remember that first morning, when her mother had first held a chef's knife. She couldn't even peel an onion properly, her eyes welling up with tears as she laughed a little self-consciously. "Why does just cutting this have to sting so much?" she'd asked. I had gently wrapped my hands around hers from behind. "It's okay. A knife isn't scary. The only thing that matters is who you're cutting it for." I had gently guided her hands, the hands of a young woman who didn't even know how to hold a knife properly. And now, those same hands were raising a child of her own. And that child was sitting right here, in front of me today. Time may pass, but the hands that teach will always, somewhere, receive something in return. After she had slowly savored her meal, she said just one thing before she left. "I'll be back. My mom said she wants to come with me next time." I bowed deeply and watched her go, until her small back disappeared beyond the door. After closing, as I was cleaning the counter, my eyes fell on the wall of the kitchen. There, that ladle was hanging, swaying gently. I don't need an apology anymore. I don't need praise or accolades. If the food I make can leave something in someone's heart, whether it's a scent, a memory, or a warmth that can't be put into words, that is enough for me. That is what I realized that day. Not everyone apologizes with words. Some people let years pass in silence. And others? Others may send their feelings through a child, back to the place they once caused pain. It is a form of atonement that travels a much greater distance than a spoken "I'm sorry," but one that is infinitely deeper. I never needed to hear it. Not the words, "I'm sorry." I understand now how much it can fill your heart just to hear someone say, "I'll come see you again." As the little girl walked out the restaurant door, I gently watched her go. When I lifted my gaze, I saw a woman standing a short distance away. He. She didn't approach. She just stood there, silently, and then she lowered her head in a deep, slow bow. There were no words, no expression on her face, but I felt that everything was contained in that single gesture. The pain of that day, the misunderstanding of that day, the tears I had swallowed on that day, it all seemed to unravel and melt away in that one instant. I said nothing. I just gave a small nod and whispered in my heart, "Thank you. That is more than enough." I will never return to that house. But every morning, as I open the door to my new restaurant and take that old ladle in my hand, I think to myself, the fire in my heart is still burning, quietly but steadily. To heal a wounded heart, you don't always need words of apology. If you just have time and a place where you can start over gently, you can always find the strength to walk forward again. I was once kicked out of the home where I had stood in a kitchen every single day. The soup I had poured my soul into was called garbage, and there were days when I thought I had nothing left to give to anyone. But now, the flavor that was rejected back then is moving people's hearts. Seeing that little girl smile as she said, "My mom told me you taught her how to cut an onion and how to live too." I saw a fleeting image of the young woman she used to be. I had, indeed, gently supported her hands when she didn't even know how to hold a knife. It's true that when I heard his trembling voice on the phone say, "I'm sorry," my heart softened a little. But I chose not to go back. I decided to live my own life, in my own place. I never needed words of apology. Just hearing her say, "We'll come see you again," was enough to make my heart feel full. Have you ever been looked down on by your family for staying quiet for too long? Have you spent decades cooking for your family, only to have that food treated like garbage? If you have, please leave a comment below and write, "I don't need praise, I just want respect." And if this story reminded you of the importance of your mother's cooking, or your grandmother's recipes, please share this video. Sometimes, a woman who once left her kitchen can move the world with nothing but the taste of her love. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We promise to bring you more stories like this one, stories that will make a quiet tear fall.